let's get started with how I edited this photo. So first off, here is my entire Lightroom library for this photo. As you can see, it's like 400 photos, but what I was doing is bracketing 5 exposures for almost every one of these. So it's really only more like 80 photos. And so what I've gone ahead and done first is gone through and flagged or marked each photo I want to use. And I've done that by just labeling them green. So as you can see, some of these have a green square, and those are the ones I've gone through and picked that I may want to use for my final photo. And we can see all of those here by turning on the filters for green. And so I've narrowed down, 400 photos to around 30. And from there, we're going to select 6 to 8 or so to make our final product here. And I've gone ahead and done that beforehand, and I have flagged, as you can see here, each of the photos that I want to use to make this final photo. So I haven't really done anything in Lightroom with any of the photos except done lens corrections on all of them. And I believe I changed my camera profile to the landscape profile for Sony, as you can see here. And that's pretty much all I've done in Lightroom. Everything else is going to be done in Photoshop. So now I'm going to go ahead and select all of the photos I have flagged. And we may not even use all of them, but we're going to select them all, and then we're going to open as layers in Photoshop. Everything is aligned. Even though we didn't move our camera while shooting, there were several times where a wave came up to where my tripod was, and water got around the tripod. And anytime that happens, the tripod's probably going to sink a little bit in the sand. Plus, for whatever reason, even like changes in focus, it's going to make things move just slightly sometimes. So we need to make sure everything is aligned. And we still may have to do some tweaking. Like usually Photoshop does a pretty good job. But sometimes even after doing the auto align, you still need to zoom in and just make sure things don't move. And right now it's looking like it did a pretty good job. And if we'll be checking this periodically when we start blending our photo just to make sure nothing weird is going on. All right, so here's our first base layer photo, our bright layer. That has the sun and the bright sky on the right. And this layer, all I'm going to use this for, this is just an underexposed shot of this layer, or this photo. It's just part of the same bracket. And all I'm going to use this for is to get a little bit more defined sun, so it's not so bright and blown out right there. And the way I'm going to do this is to add a black mask to the layer, and then I'm going to paint it in with a brush. And that's what we're basically going to do for all of our layers. And I also like to bring down my opacity and my flow on the brush as well. And we're just going to try to paint in our sun here, just so it's not quite so bright. And also paint in some of this darker color here in the sky, just so it's a little more even around the sun. Something like that. We zoom back out, and you can see the before and after there. You can just see the sun a little bit more. It's not quite as bright. All right, So now we have some of our pink cloud layers and some of this orange after sunset back here that we want to blend in. And so we're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to add a black mask. You can do this by holding Option and clicking on the mask button. Or you can go up to, I believe, I don't know where it is because I never do it this way, but it's, I think, Edit or Image, no, Layer probably. And Layer Mask, and then Hide All would be the option. But you can option click, it's just much easier and quicker, I think. All right, and if we shift click on the mask, it'll turn the mask off so we could see the original photo, so we can just see kind of what we're dealing with here and what we kind of want to paint in. And so what I want to paint in is going to be mostly the area, or not mostly, but the area kind of in the middle, left of the sun. Might paint in some of these clouds, but I doubt it because that's where our bright layer is. So we want this section over here to remain bright. We don't want too much of the pink clouds. But all this right in here, we want to paint in. So I'm gonna do this the same way as I just did the sun with a lower opacity around 50%. You can play with that as you want. You can have it lower or higher, and then a lower flow also right around 40-50%. And then we're just gonna paint in here. Just like painting on a canvas. And I don't know if you can hear my mouse clicking, but I'm like tapping it with every click. Because when you have the lower opacity, the more you tap, you have to click your mouse more to get the opacity to go higher, if that makes sense. Yeah, just something like this. And what I'm really looking for is to make sure I don't have any harsh like lines. So if we, you know, did something, let me turn up my opacity just so you can see it better. Something real harsh like this, where you could really see this line. That's the type of stuff I'm trying to avoid. Because we want it to be smooth. We want it to just be a smooth transition from day to night. So I'm going to undo all that real quick. Set my opacity back down. All right, I think this looks pretty good for now. We might do some tweaking at the end. And again, with all these layers, like once you get everything blended, you can go back into every layer and just kind of play around with it. So this one, I have some more of these pink clouds, a little bit darker of a sky. And I just want to, again, paint this in nice and smooth. Really like these pink clouds. I think they look really nice. And even though we're getting a little far to the left, that's fine because we can blend them in to our dark layer when we get there. And again, we can kind of turn this off and on to see exactly what we want to paint in here. I think that looks pretty good here. All right, so this layer, I'm literally just using just for the water. And this, you don't have to do this. Some people might think it looks kind of weird, because another thing I want to do is I like this warm light and shadow on the sand here, so I don't want to cover that up. So I don't want to use the entire water because it's going to cover up that light and shadow. I really just want part of it. So it's going to be kind of tricky to make it look smooth. And again, this isn't something you necessarily have to do, but I like the streaky water and I want to include it. And the key is, this is another reason why you just use a low opacity, low flow, because you can just kind of blend it in and have it slowly fade away from the sand. Make it kind of look as natural as possible. Which some people might say it doesn't, but I think it looks pretty good, actually. I think it looks fine. We can turn it off and on and see what we've done. And I think that's a pretty smooth transition there. Okay. So this one we may not use. I don't really see anything. I can add some more pink clouds up here. But really, once we get this far left, this is going to be our dark. It's going to start turning night over here. So I don't know if we'll paint them in for now, but they might end up going away later. We'll see. All right. And then this one, this layer I want to use for this real deep, dark orange here, and probably to help transition to our dark sky off over here on the left. So again, a black mask, and I'm gonna make my brush a little bit smaller. And just kind of paint in that orange sky. See, like I said, those clouds we just painted in, getting a little bit too dark for my liking right there. So let's start over with that. And let's actually just make our brush a little bit bigger. And it can be dark over here on the left because that's where our night is going to be. But I don't want it to be too harsh when you get to like this section here. I want these pink clouds to blend in nicely to, and I think I actually have a better layer for this. So I'm going to undo all that, and the only thing I'm going to use this layer for is going to be this dark orange right here in the middle. It's just a little too dark for the transition from the pink clouds to night, and that's why I have this layer here is more of a blue hour layer. As you can see, the clouds are no longer pink because the sun is so far down. But it's a nice dark blue to transition us from those pink clouds into black or dark when we use our next and final last layer. So you can see, yeah, this is a much smoother transition than that previous layer. And all of this is stuff you can do to taste, you know. This is going to be different for everybody. You don't have to do it exactly like me. That's what's kind of cool about doing these types of photos is you can take this in a million different ways and do lots of different things with it. And now we have our final layer, and this I'm mostly using just for the lights. So I'm going to kind of do some different things with this layer, but I'm also going to use it to get as my darkest part of the sky over here. So let's actually do something a little different with this. I want to change the blend mode to lighten, just so I get more of that like starburst from the lights. And then we can still use a mask to paint in, oops, what just happened? To paint in the dark part of the sky over here. I have to do a couple things with this actually. So one thing I'm actually going to do is select just the highlights from this layer. And the way I'm going to do that is to go into channels. And I'm on a Mac, if you command or control click on the RGB channel, it's going to select just the highlights. And so as you can see the marching ants are selecting just the highlights. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mask out of that selection. So if we turn this off and on, you could see it's really just affecting the lights and the other bright parts of the photo. And so now what we're going to do is just kind of edit this. So like if I turn it off and on, you could see that it's doing the lights, but it's also making some weird things like here in the water and some weird things on the sand. So what we're going to do is just paint those out. And if you paint, when a layer is in lighten mode, if you paint with a black mask, or black as your brush color, sorry, I'm going to turn up my opacity some too, it will erase that lighten mode from being in those parts. Like, I don't want this light too much. Maybe a little bit is fine. This, I'm just going to darken it a little bit. I just want some of it, not all of it. And like you can see, it does some weird stuff here. So if you turn it off and on, it's just part of what the light and blend mode does. Let's do some more off and on. Okay, I think that's just about fine, actually. And now I should be able to still use this mask and paint in the dark sky just as we did before. But then again, maybe not. No. It's okay. We might just have to use a second dark layer. So what I'm going to do is go back to Lightroom. I'm just going to select a different one. I'll use this one. And I'm going to edit in Adobe Photoshop. And then I'm going to Command A to select all, Command C to copy, Command W to close the window. I'm going to paste it here on top. And I'm not going to worry about aligning this layer because I'm not going to do anything with the pier. I'm just going to use it for the sky over here. So it should be fine if it's just a little bit out of alignment with the other ones. And again, same thing. Brush, low opacity, low flow. And I'm just going to paint in the dark. I have to be a little careful with the dark because I don't want, you can just make it a little much or it gets a little harsh. And you just kind of want to avoid that. And I just go back and forth here with changing my brush colors, painting in and out of how much dark I want and how I want it to be, if that makes sense. But yeah, something like that. I think looks pretty decent. And this is now we can start actually editing our photo. So this is just the blend, if you will. And I also just want to kind of take a look at some of these layers and just see if we want to edit anything. If we want to add some more, like I think I do actually want to add in some more pink clouds actually. So I'm gonna take this transition, yeah, and make it just so it's a little bit further left. So I have a little bit more of the pink clouds. And I'm just going to continue to go through all of the layers. And you know what I really want to do here is I like that deep orange that we get with this, but I don't like how I just painted over everything when I did it the first time. And I darkened down the pier a lot. So now what I'm going to do is zoom in closer and try to erase that from just the pier. Just so the pier's not quite as dark. Just have to be kind of careful you don't get any like crazy halos and such. And if you notice, like if I did too much, you can see how it gets kind of that like white ring around the pier after it's dark here. And if you notice any of that stuff, you can just change the color on your brush and kind of paint it out. That's another benefit of the low opacity or a lower opacity on your brush is you can just make the transitions of those types of things smoother so they're not as noticeable. And I want to see if I have a layer. I want to lighten up this part of the pier too, but I think this part is actually from when the sun was like this right here, so it was kind of silhouetted like that. But yeah, I think that looks better than what we just had. And this one is just for a little bit more of those pink clouds. Is there anything else we want to paint in? I kind of like that one little part right along here. paint some of that back in. And then this one is just for our water, so we're going to leave that one. Actually, let me see what the pier looks like. Is it a little bit brighter? A little bit. Let's see if we can bring back some of the pier from this photo. Yeah. Just bring it back a little bit. This one, I think this one is good as it is. Same kind of with this one. And now we'll build it back up. All right, so this one I'm gonna tweak a little bit. I'm just gonna have my transition go a little bit further to the left side of the photo, just so a little bit more of those pink clouds stand out, something like that. Yeah, I think that looks good. And again, like I was saying before, this is something you can just do to what you think looks good. And that I do need to smooth back out. It's a little harsh on that transition. Maybe something like that. All right, so just for the sakes of this video, I'm gonna call this done. At least for our blend, I mean. And now we're gonna get into actually editing the photo like you would a regular photo. So what I'm gonna do is, or what I like to do, get that out of the way. Select all my layers, put them in a folder, and I'm just gonna call this blend. And then I'm gonna create a brand new layer out of our blend. All right, and so now you can do, you can do regular editing in Photoshop. You can do, I'm gonna do some stuff in Camera Raw. You could go back to Lightroom if you like to just do your edits in Lightroom. One program I use that is really good, I think, is called Radiant Photo. I'm a big fan of Elia Liccardi. He's a landscape photographer, if you've never heard of him. And he created this editing program. And it does a lot of stuff that I used to do in Photoshop and literally just opening it in Radiant Photo. Like you can see there's before from Photoshop and this is after. Like it uses AI to, I don't know exactly what it does, but I like what it does. It adds contrast and color contrast, and like watch what it does with exposure. It's not the same as exposure as in like Lightroom, where like you do exposure in Lightroom and it starts blowing stuff out. You could turn up this exposure and it like just gives you, I don't know how to say it other than just brightness. Like obviously this is too much. I'm just showing it as an example of what it does. So I'm going to turn it back down. I might even turn it all the way off. Let me see what it does off. I kind of like it. I think I'm going to leave it. And then I really like the super contrast and like all this stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with the Nik program, the Nik collection. I used to use it a lot, using all sorts of filters in the Nik collection, mostly to add contrast to my scene. And Radiant Photo has taken the place of pretty much all of that type of stuff for me. And Radiant Photo does not sponsor me. Elia Liccardi does not know who I am, more than likely. But their product is really great. And I was lucky enough, I got this for free when I bought Elia's landscape photography tutorial, Photographing the World. If you're interested in that, it's on the Fstoppers site. It's fstoppers.com, and you can find out more information about it there. But anyways, let's get to like actually editing. And I just like to like play around with these settings, light diffusion, depth. I think I'm gonna use that actually. Maybe turn it down some though. And there's all sorts of other, I call them presets, although they're not really presets. Like right now, and it detects this stuff automatically usually. Like if you have a night photo, it's gonna edit it to a night photo. It's gonna know what you have and kind of automatically apply what it thinks are good edits to it. And the color contrast might turn this up a little bit. Don't want to get too crazy with it, because it is adding like some weirdness in the black over here, so I want to be careful. But that's another thing you can do is like if you think what you've done is a little much, let there's some vibrancy. So if you think you've gone too far, let's just for example turn up super contrast. You can come up here to the enhance and be like, that's a little much, and turn it down, and it will lessen the effect. But let's actually undo that. And another thing I like to do with this is I'll show you when we get back to Photoshop. So right now I think this is pretty good. Like there's my before, straight out of Photoshop from the blend, and here's my after. I think that looks pretty good. And I like to turn the sharpening off because if I do sharpening, I like to do it at the end. So I'm going to hit apply. And one thing that's nice about this, and I'm going to actually name my layer just to stay organized. I'm going to name it RAD for radiant. If you think you've gone too far, what's nice is you can turn down the opacity of the layer just to kind of make it not as much if you think you went a little too far on the editing side. And I usually turn it back down to about 75%. I'm going to do that here just because. All right. And then, I mean, from here, I think it looks pretty good. You could just be done if you want. I'm going to do a few more things with it just to kind of show you the types of things I did on my original photo. But some people might want to just be done here and call it a day. And that's totally fine. One thing I want to do is add a warming filter to some of the warm spots, not the whole photo. And I'm going to do this kind of the same way I did the blend. I'm going to turn this up until I'm looking at like the sand and the pink clouds and the oranges. And when they look good, I'm going to stop. And then the mask for the photo filter comes as white, but I'm going to hit Command I and change it to black. And then this allows me, I got to switch my colors on my brush, and I'm going to turn up my opacity a little bit. But then this allows me to just paint in the warming only where I want it. I can make it subtle. So it's not the whole photo being affected. I'm going to zoom in here so I can get a little bit more precise on these clouds. And yeah, I see some sensor dust we need to remove. And again, just like painting, just like you're painting on a canvas. That's one thing I like about the brush. And when we did the blend with the brush, you don't have to use a brush. I'm sure you could use a gradient tool. There's all sorts of tools you could use. I just happen to like using the brush because I think for me, it's just the most convenient. It's the one I like to use the most. All right, so we can turn this off and on and kind of see what we've done. I think that looks pretty good. And then let's go in. I like to play with the levels of my photo a lot of the times. Let's just go in and just kind of move the sliders around and see what we come up with. I want to make the blacks a little darker. Maybe the highlights a little brighter. And then let's just kind of play with our midtones and see what happens here. And for me, I think something like right there looks pretty good. All right. And so now I'm going to do a couple quick things. So I'm not going to do it now just for the sake of time, but I would get rid of these people. You don't have to get rid of the people. You could leave them in there. Some people like to have the people as part of their photos. For me, I would choose to get rid of them. But again, just for sake of time, I'm not going to do that right now. There's a million different ways to get rid of people. With generative fill nowadays is pretty easy. But what I do want to do is do some dodging and burning to the water here. And I'm going to show you how I do that. So my favorite method of dodging and burning is just adding another layer. And what I do with this layer is on a Mac, I have to hold Function, Shift, and then F5. And I want to fill this layer with 50% gray. And then over here on the blend mode, I'm going to change it to overlay. And then with a brush, I'm going to turn the opacity all the way up, but the flow down to something like 3 or 4%. And if you paint with white, it's going to be dodging, making it brighter. And then if you paint with black, it's going to be burning or making it darker. And you want this to be subtle. You don't want it to be too crazy. If that's why you use a low flow. Because if you turn the flow up, I'll show you, it's going to just paint like a big white blob. That's not what we want. We want it to be subtle. And just kind of paint in some happy waves. I might make this part a little bit brighter as well. And up here, I mean, this part is supposed to be daylight, but we're going to do some more to this side here in a minute. And yeah, I'm just going in and painting in the white parts just to make them stand out a little bit more. And then I'm going to take a dark brush or change my color to black and do some burning here on the darker parts of the water and maybe the darker parts of the colors. And then, like, I mean, on the computer, you might not even be able to tell anything that I even did anything. But if we come in here and turn it off and on, you can see what I've done. And again, not a drastic change, but that's kind of the goal. You want it to be subtle. All right, and I'm honestly pretty much almost done with this. I mean, again, you could do a million different things with this. But what I'm going to do is create a new layer out of all of this. And I'm going to do that by hitting Command, Option, Shift, E. And now we got a brand new layer with all of the adjustments we did. And I'm going to take it into Adobe Camera Raw. All right. And the first thing I want to do, well, I'm just going to do some basic stuff that you normally like mess with my highlights and my shadows. I think I don't want to do too much global adjustments because I want the highlights on the right side to be bright. But, you know, maybe tone it down just a touch. And again, same thing with the shadows. I want the left side to be dark, so I can't do too many global adjustments here. Let me mess with the contrast. Like, I like contrasty photos. I know not everyone does. I do, so I like to add contrast. I also like to add dehaze. Dehaze is probably one of my favorite effects to use in all of Lightroom. So now what I'm going to do is use a couple of masks. I'm going to use a linear gradient on the left and right side to just bring down and up the exposure. I'm going to bring down the exposure of the dark side and bring up the exposure of the right side. Why is this in my way? Get out of here. All right. And again, nothing too crazy. Maybe right around half a stop or so. Turn off this overlay just so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Yeah, something like that. And turn it off and on so we can see what we did. Again, I want it to be subtle, so nothing too crazy. I'll bring it down a little bit more. All right. And now we're going to do another linear gradient, this time on the right side. And we're going to bring up our exposure. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe move it over just a little bit. Turn it off and on. Yeah, something like that. All right, I think that's looking, we can do our before and after here by hitting backslash on the keyboard. And I think that looks pretty good. And And let's see. Another thing I like to do is just play with the color grading. I might bring up the luminance of the midtones. I might not as well. Just gotta see what that looks like. I'll leave it up a little bit. And what else do I want to do? I think for now, let's see what happens if we warm it up a little bit. That's a little much. And turn that back down. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna call it quits on the Adobe. All I really wanted to do was use the two gradients to just make it brighter and darker on each side of the photo. So just hit OK. And I think that is pretty much it. Again, we could take out this stupid sensor dust very easily. Kind of scan around and make sure we don't have any more. And from our alignment, as you could see, where we had to align the photos, we lost some around the edges. So you just want to be sure that you crop in so you don't have that weird stuff on the outside from the other photos. And did I get all of it? I think so. It's hard to tell. Might be a little left down there on the bottom. We can just crop it out real quick. All right, but yeah, I think that is pretty much it. I'm pretty satisfied with this. So I hope you learned something out of all of that. And right now we will just save it. And then while it's saving, I'm going to turn everything off and go back here to our blend and just kind of show you what we've done. So we started with, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 photos. 10 photos. And we started with our bright layer. You could start with the dark layer if you wanted. I just like to start with the bright and work to dark. And we did that one just for the sun. And then we started painting in our sunset colors and pink clouds, and then more of them. And then a layer for the cool water. And then some more pink clouds. And then our dark oranges once the sun was below the horizon. And then our blue hour layer to transition into our dark layer. And then a layer for the lights on the pier. And then our dark layer. And then we added some contrast using Radiant Photo. We did a warming filter. Played around with the levels. Some dodge and burning. And then a couple of masks in Adobe Camera Raw. And there is our finished product. Well, I hope you guys at least learned something and got something out of this video. But yeah, doing this day to night stuff can be a lot of fun. It's just something different to do with photography that not a ton of people are doing. And again, it gives you a lot of leeway creatively to do a lot of different things. Hopefully you saw that the blending of these images is really not that difficult, at least in a scene like this. So yeah, get out there and try it yourself, and I'd love to see the results of what you can come up with. All right, later guys.